The iPhone SE2 sounds like one insane deal in 2023, sporting the nostalgic home button design but with modern specs for just $150 USD on the used market. And so, is it all sunshine and rainbows like it seems, or should you avoid it like the plague? Well, after switching to the SE2 from my iPhone 13 Pro Max for a week, I'm now able to tell you how it's held up after 3 years and whether it's worth picking one up, starting off with the design. So it's technically almost a 10-year-old design. The iPhone SE is based off the design of the 2017 iPhone 8, which in turn is based off the 2014 iPhone 6. So there is no doubting that this look is nothing we haven't seen before, but that's all in favor of those who still prefer having the home button and Touch ID over the gesture system and Face ID. And to switch to this layout and form factor from my 13 Pro Max was pretty much a whole new way of doing things, and it felt a bit nostalgic, although that home button does come with the price of those bezels, which are pretty much impossible to ignore in this day and age. But it's not all bad news. For one, they give your thumbs a place to rest and grip the phone when holding it in landscape, and they also get rid of those black bars you get when watching videos on an all-screen iPhone, since the SE's display is 16:9. But I'll come back to the display in just a minute. But again, the reason the bezels are there in the first place is because of the SE's major attraction, the home button. Again, some will prefer the tactileness and physicality of the home button over swiping up to go home like on newer models. Personally, for me, I find it quite satisfying to press, and I also think that Touch ID is far easier and far more convenient than Face ID. The Touch ID on here, as expected, also works really fast, and you only really have to brush past the sensor lightly to be recognized. With the size and ergonomics, I found it to be pretty much that perfect smartphone size, maybe just a tad on the small side, but it's great for one-handed use, it's barely noticeable in your pocket, and unlike my 13 Pro Max and a lot of flagships today, it never got tiring to hold after a while. Also, it's still a very premium feeling product despite its price and the design's age. With glass and aluminium all around, the whole thing just feels well put together and solid. Now, we do get quite a few modern niceties on the outside, such as IP67 water resistance and wireless charging on the back. On the bottom, we get our speakers and lightning port, and the speakers are nothing groundbreaking, but this stereo setup does the job, not exceptionally, but it makes intelligible noise. Nonetheless though, this is a nostalgic design, and while it isn't for everyone in this day and age, some people definitely do prefer the modern design, but there does also exist that group of people that much prefer the home button layout and just want the phone to feel the same as their last one, and it's really good to have the nostalgia of the iPhone 6 and 8 design that will last quite a few years into the future. Now, moving back to the front of the SE, we have that 4.7-inch LCD display, pretty much the same one on the iPhone 8. Bezels and side aside, the actual quality of the display will differ depending on who you ask. If you ask the average non-techie Joe, they'll tell you it's fine, it shows everything clearly enough, and it does the job, whether that be reading articles, watching videos, or simply just dialing in a number. I mean, maybe a decent amount of people will prefer a larger display, but if you're not really into tech specs, there's nothing actually wrong with it if you don't care about the nitty-gritty stuff. But if you ask a tech spec nerd, they'll tell you it's mediocre at best, and it's missing quite a chunk compared to the modern luxuries we're used to now. And I'm not just talking about the bezels. For one, it's only 720p, so it actually can't show full HD content, so in turn, it's not as sharp, it's only LCD, so you're not getting those deep true blacks, there's no tap to wake, only raise to wake, and if I really want to have a go at the SE, I'll also point out that it's only 60Hz, so newer phone displays with higher refresh rates will be much smoother. I mean, personally, the only thing that I really noticed in day-to-day life was the drop in high refresh rate, but that aside, I pretty much had no problems with it, because yeah, while it is missing a few bits here and there, it shows things well enough, you can't see pixels from a normal viewing distance, and on a phone this small, it's really not that necessary to have all the best stuff, because the small size definitely makes it harder to notice. So yeah, in the grand scheme of things, it blows nothing out of the water, but because it wasn't really designed for people who care about having the fanciest specs, honestly, you can't really knock it. Something else you can't really knock though is getting 50% off unlimited mobile data, paying $15 a month instead of $30 with today's video partner, Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile allows you to get affordable unlimited 5G data for as low as $15 a month without sacrificing any coverage, speed or data like so many other cheap and nasty brands make you do. And plus, Ryan Reynolds owns the company, something you can't really flex about your current provider.
Hey there, it's Ryan Reynolds, owner of Mint Mobile. Enticing, right?
Mint Mobile keeps costs low by selling online instead of in person, which cuts out the cost of retail stores, yet it's the largest mobile network in the US. With Mint Mobile, you can't notice a single blip of difference in speeds compared to mainstream services, whether that be YouTube, games, or simply just reading the news or browsing the web. And their sign-up process is just as quick as their mobile service, taking just 15 minutes to switch carriers via eSIM, or if your phone isn't eSIM compatible, they'll ship you a physical one for free. There's 1,440 minutes in a day, so why not just spend spend 15 of those signing up for Mint Mobile using this QR code or via the link in the description. In doing that, you're again getting 50% off an already insane deal for unlimited 5G data, and you'll be with the largest mobile network in the US. And thank you so much again to Mint Mobile and Ryan Reynolds for partnering with me for this video. And now let's take a look at the iPhone SE's cameras. Are they as bare bones as the rest of the phone? Well, on the rear we get a single 12 megapixel lens and then a 7 megapixel selfie camera on the front. As you might expect from this phone, these cameras are nothing fancy. They're quite far behind, being pretty much the same sensors as on the 2017 iPhone 8, but with the newer software and chipset, the image processing ups the quality significantly from the 8, although this camera is actually quite mediocre compared to more expensive phones. Probably the most annoying thing for me about this camera wasn't actually the lack in photo quality, but more so the lack of camera features compared to my 13 Pro Max. There's no night mode, so dark environments don't come out as good, and portrait mode only works with people and not pets or objects. And even then, the portrait mode can be pretty iffy around the edges of the subject. You also don't get the benefits of multiple lenses like ultra wide or telephoto, and so it was a lot harder to take a photo I was really satisfied with. And that's also contributed to by the fact that this is a much smaller sensor. Newer and more expensive phones have bigger sensors that let in more light and produce more detail, and again, the quality drop was absolutely noticeable. Not to sort of a callous extent, I mean, this is still good photo quality, you can still capture memories just fine, but it won't blow anything past 2017 out of the water. In saying that though, some shots can turn out darn impressive in the right lighting conditions. In broad daylight, you're looking at vibrant colors, quite a bit of detail, and great stabilization. Unfortunately though, in those indoor shots with sort of iffy lighting, all of those things are nowhere to be found. It can go from stunning to grainy and blurry with a change of lighting. But all in all, for the average Joe who doesn't need all the camera features in the world and just wants to capture memories, this camera does the job more than well enough, because again, in the right lighting conditions, shots can actually turn out really well. Now the selfie camera is pretty much in the same situation. It's nothing special, but it does the job. It takes a photo of you. Although at 7 megapixels, it is a lot harder not to get a grainy shot. Newer and better selfie cameras with more megapixels are going to look sharper, although again, for someone who doesn't really care about photo quality as long as it's decent enough, this selfie camera is just fine. Now video can be shot on here in up to 4K at 60 frames per second, which is pretty darn impressive for a phone this size to be able to do. It's pretty good video, we have decent stabilization, good colors, enough detail, and for the basics, it's got pretty much everything you could need. Like the photos, it's nothing special, and indoor shots are going to go down the loo in terms of grain and detail, but for the target audience, someone who doesn't care about having the best of everything on a phone, you can't really knock it. And speaking of can't knock it, let's move on to the iPhone SE's performance, which is surprisingly high-end considering how average everything else is. And switching from my 13 Pro Max, performance was not something I had to get used to, because it was pretty much just as fast. On here, we get the Apple A13 chipset and 3 gigs of RAM. The A13 is the same chipset out of the 2019 iPhone 11 and 11 Pros, and it's still quite powerful. You know, it can run almost anything without any hiccups, from games to scrolling social media to running tons of things in the background. And it also doesn't really get hot either, unlike previous iPhones with the same design, because of the newer and more efficient chipset. For the price, and for the target audience, the SE provides more than enough power. They could easily have put something like the A12 or A11 inside here, and not many people would have really batted an eye, but fortunately, they put the best chipset at the time into it. Now of course, you know, it's not going to be as perfectly lightning snappy as the most recent iPhones. You know, it does take maybe a split second or two longer to open apps, but we're just pulling straws here. I never actually noticed any difference in day-to-day life. The iPhone SE2 is all in all a very snappy device, and it'll do the job, power user or not, and it's probably going to stay that way quite a few years from now. These days, iPhones are getting 6 to 7 years of software support, so with the A13 chipset coming out in 2019, we can expect software support until around late 2025, or even late 2026 if we're lucky. What this means is that while the phone is supported, you'll be getting all of the latest features, and apps will work at their best, but when support is dropped, you no longer get those new features that come out, and over the course of a few years, apps will slowly stop working with your older software. Based off the trends we're seeing nowadays, the SE still has around maybe 2 to 3 years left of updates, and even after software support is dropped, apps should still work well with it for at least 2 to 3 years more after that. So while it's not the best long-term solution, it's not really going anywhere that soon. And for the money, you're getting a phone that will remain usable performance and software-wise for quite a while. I mean, most people upgrade their phones after 2 to 3 years anyway. And finally, I hate to end this review on a bad note, but the battery life on here is pretty much the main drawback to the SE. The battery on here is only 1624 mAh, which is pretty darn tiny. Therefore, anything more than light use and you'll be struggling to make it through a full day, especially now that the batteries inside of these phones have had time to degrade, which means that if your battery health is below around 85%, you are not going to be a happy camper. Although even at 100% health, the SE's battery is not going to sit well with power users. Now, to be fair, I guess I am a power user. I use my hotspot all day, and I'm on my phone quite a bit, so this phone wasn't really designed with that use in mind, but I was still finding myself recharging the phone around 1 to 2 times per day, which is kind of appalling. I mean, even with light to moderate use, watching YouTube for half an hour can really affect how much battery you'll have left for the day, unless of course you carry around a portable charger. Although, to be fair, people who are only going to be texting and calling on here probably won't have to charge their phone any more than the rest of us. Battery life on here was definitely the most annoying thing I had to adapt to. My 13 Pro Max's battery is an absolute tanker, but with the SE, I had to carry around a charger with me everywhere. But the phone is cheap and everything else is half decent, so I guess there has to be a catch somewhere. But if you're a heavy or even moderate user, it is absolutely essential that you know what you're getting into in terms of battery life on here. But make sure you do get a phone with a battery health that's as close to 100% as possible. And so with everything about the iPhone SE2 in 2023 now out of the way, is it the right device for you? Well, if you're coming from something like an iPhone 7 or 8 and want the phone to feel and work in the same way as the last one with the home button, but you also want to pay as little as possible, this is a pretty darn good option if you can find one in good condition and with a good battery health. Or if you're after just a bare bones phone that's cheap and reliable, and you don't mind sacrificing a lot of the fancy, non-essential features, then the SE2 should absolutely be on your list. However, if you're a power user or you're after all the latest and greatest features and gizmos, this is definitely something you should avoid like the plague. Its battery life definitely does not mix with using the phone a lot, and in terms of features, it's pretty darn bare bones. On the flip side, there's actually a newer iPhone SE that came out in early 2022, although it's the exact same thing apart from a better chipset, 5G, and ever so slightly better battery life. But that's being sold new for $429 from Apple, which is absolutely terrible value, so please don't do that. Although second-hand prices of the 2022 SE are starting to come down to not much more than the 2020 SE. So that's also something worth considering, but if you want the absolute best value, the 2020 iPhone SE2 is the one. But again, it's definitely not the phone for everyone, so if you care about having literally anything more than the bare necessities, then you'll want to steer clear of it. But, you know, all in all, the SE2 has held up solidly over the past 3 years. It was and still is a great budget phone for millions of people, and on the used market, it represents pretty darn good value for money. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, please make sure you drop me a like and subscribe to TechSpree for more reviews, insights, and the occasional unboxing. Thank you so much for watching. This is Tom with TechSpree, and I'll see you as always next time.